All right, folks, welcome back. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but we're back with you, and we are once again talking with Upton Bell. I think Reef will probably hop on here in just a second. But in the meantime, wanted to get back to where we were. I wanted to talk a little bit. I'm actually reading a book right now about the Steagles. Last Team Standing is the book. Excellent book about the time that the Steelers and the Eagles joined forces in the midst of World War II. I know your dad was involved a bit in that, Upton. Can you tell us a little bit of, give us a little bit of an inside scoop in terms of how that really helped save the NFL?
Well, actually, I've read the book and I've talked to the author, and
Sure.
he's in a huge collection that I have of people from all over the world. And my father had sold the Eagles and had gone into ownership, 50-50 partnership with Art Rooney at the Steelers. And basically, I mean, two things that my father did among many. And the first one was to get the owners not to vote to close the league during the Second World War. I mean, we talk about what happened during the pandemic and some of the other things, and seasons shortened. But basically, he got up and he said to them, "Gentlemen, if you close now, you will never reopen." This is when he and Rooney were partners at the Steelers. And he said, there's another league that's going to be coming in eventually, which they did in 1945-46, which involved the Cleveland Browns, the old All-America Conference. But during the war years, he and Art Rooney, equal partners in the Steelers, merged twice. The first one was with the Eagles. The second time, it was with the Cardinals. And that was called the Pitt Cardinals, I believe, or Pitt Chives, something like that. But basically, that they saw that the only way that they could survive within the league is really merging the two teams. And the interesting thing about it was then to decide what players were going to play from the Eagles and what players were going to play from the Steelers, basically. But the Steelers did it twice, once with the Cardinals. But the famous one that was written about in the book that you read was a fascinating look at survival. And again, I wish the people that hear your show and hear what I have to say understand that the NFL came within inches of closing down. And that was one of the facts. I'll tell you how bad it was. And Arthur Daly, the Pro Football Hall of Fame writer from the New York Times, wrote this story that in 1942-43, that the team was being fed in Pittsburgh by a grocer. And the grocer finally said, "I can't keep affording to feed your team." He said, "So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to call in all the money you owe me." I mean, they literally could have starved to death. So my father, in a genius move, traded a player from the Steelers to the Eagles for cash. And that cash paid the grocery bill so they could continue to eat. How many people are that? I mean,
that's
you could go and read that story. And again, I say to people, hopefully through your show and other historians I've talked to, that they will go back and see what the NFL really was and understand the reality versus today, where everybody, not only do they gamble on it, and you have legitimized gambling, and you have all of these other things, that basically this was a league, the most popular league outside of soccer in the world, that barely hung on. Barely.
Right. Wanted to ask, your father becomes commissioner, I believe, shortly after that, right around the end of World War II. And then almost immediately after. Right. And almost immediately after that, there was quite a big controversy because the Rams were moving out to LA, and LA was demanding, if they played there, that they had to be allowed to draft African-American players. And I know that was a big thing. I know that George Preston Marshall of the Redskins was, he certainly doesn't hold up particularly well and through the years. But I was curious how your dad was able to work that when obviously that caused a ton of controversy. What I read was that the Rams had their stadium was built by taxpayers, and they weren't going to let people discriminate against certain taxpayers.
That because early on in the NFL, back in the 20s, Fritz Pollard is in the Hall of Fame as a player coach. He was an African American, and my father always felt that African Americans, and that was never fully explained why that, because as far as I ever heard in my house, I never heard the word ban, or I never heard no black players. I never heard any of that. But he used it as an opportunity because he's the one that said, he is not Dan Reeves in Cleveland, won the championship, and he's not drawing any people. Ironically, Paul Brown did with the Cleveland Browns, but that was years later. So when they went to the coast, actually, the Coliseum, and good for them, the trustees of the Coliseum, the commission, said basically the Rams can't play here unless you have, in those days, they said black players. The two African Americans that broke the color line, I met both of them a year later. It was an amazing time for me to learn about race. Kenny Washington, who was part of maybe the greatest backfield at that time, and that backfield included Jackie Robinson, who many people that I talked to in the pros at that time thought that Jackie Robinson was a better pro football prospect than anybody, and than baseball. Ironically, a year later, he breaks the color line with Frank Licky in Brooklyn. But basically, his other partner, who was part of it, was the famous actor Woody Strode, who also played in that backfield at UCLA. And they were the ones that broke the color line. And I'll never forget, 1947, we went to the All-Star game in Chicago, and they got on a train, and for the first time went across the country, over the mountains and into LA, which it was then and still today, a wildly different world. And in those days, what they had done for the second year is that the Washington, then called Redskins, played an exhibition game out there against the Rams. Believe it or not, for an exhibition game, they had almost 100,000 people. And a couple of days beforehand, I was at the practice and saw the elegant and great Kenny Washington and Woody Strode come out on the field. And I remember as a 9-year-old boy saying to myself, something is different here. This is the beginning of something. But everything about them seemed different. The way they ran, the way they caught the football, so graceful. Not that there weren't plenty of players that were graceful, but there was a difference. And I remember Kenny Washington coming out with a pair of low cuts. Well, in those days, everything was high tops. And you see that, and you say to yourself, something's changing here, and it did. And of course, it changed pro football forever. Today, there's over 70% are African Americans. And it was just a great moment for me to begin my education about racism in this country and seeing what could happen. By the way, in the 1940 All-Star game in Chicago, the pros had not integrated, and the college game had integrated. And basically, I think that they needed a letter of permission or something to play the NFL because they hadn't integrated, and the colleges had. I mean, that's old history. The other thing is, Jackie Robinson, I believe, was named the MVP in the All-Star game. That's
wow.
He was.
Oh, that's fascinating. All right. Well, we are going to go ahead and wrap it up here, but I'm going to Upton, I'm going to grab you on a different. I'm going to grab you on Zoom, and we'll wrap it up, and then we'll put it all together into a podcast. But we are going to wrap it up here, folks. We will have the podcast up for you in the next few days. So we will see you then.